Let's go back to the twitch recordings that we had taken a look at earlier briefly, considering mostly the lag phase and the contraction phase and the relaxation phase. What you see here is a recording of single isolated muscle twitches. You can tell, so the lag phase of course is not seen here, but you can see that the contraction phase, or the rising phase right here from start to the top of the contractions, the maximum tension, it's definitely faster than the relaxation phase, which is coming down like this here. We said that the lag phase, so probably the stimulation was about here, so, and of course about here. Oops, not there, so it would have been more like here. Oops. And anyway, so the lag phase is about 20 milliseconds or so, 10 to 20, and then the rising phase from bottom to the top of contractions is about 50, 60 milliseconds, and then relaxation takes a little longer, but these are single muscle twitches. Now, if you have repetitive stimulation, then you will find that the second stimulation, so here you're stimulating again, the muscle didn't have time to fully relax, and so you'll find that the next stimulation gets the muscle to perform better. It develops more strength and tension. And if you keep doing this for a while, then you will find that repetitive stimulation gets the muscle to perform better and better and better until you reach a maximum tension. That's the best performance the muscle can do. It's sort of this warm-up effect. You're stimulating the muscle, and then all of a sudden, up here you get the best performance out of it. Now then, you start stimulating even closer together, so your stimulation comes very close together. The muscle is trying to relax, but it's not going far in its attempt to relax, and you can take this even farther and make the stimulation super close together, and then you will find a complete tetanus. So where this here is an unfused or incomplete tetanus, where the muscle is still trying to relax a little bit, but here the stimulation is so close together that you get a smooth, sustained contraction up here at maximum level, and your muscle will sustain this until it runs out of ATP and phosphocreatine, and it's building up some lactic acid too, and then it's going to go down from there. So even though you're still stimulating, but the muscle just can't hold this any longer. Okay. Now moving on to motor units, that was also something covered in the lab part. A motor unit is one motor neuron and all of the fibers that it innervates. So a motor unit, the red motor unit 1 right here would be this red motor neuron and all of the red fibers that it innervates. And from what I can see here, it's like about 4 of them or something like that. And the blue motor unit would be the blue motor neuron and all of the blue muscle fibers that it innervates. So I think you get the idea. Of course, there are larger and smaller motor units in your body. If you have very fine motor skills in your fingers, then the motor units are relatively small, only a few fibers per motor neuron. And then you have also very large motor units on the order of like 500 fibers that are stimulated by a single motor neuron, for example, in your thigh muscles. Recruitment is the number of motor units that you need or recruit for for work that you want to do. So if you want to lift a very heavy load, and you need to recruit more motor units as if you were just lifting off a pencil off your desk. That's pretty much all you need to know about that. Mechanics of body movement. You should know the difference between isotonic contractions and isometric. This has nothing to do with tonicity or solutions. Tonicity always means strength, and of course when it comes to solutions we talk about ionic strength, but here we just mean shear strength, as in muscle strength. Iso means same, tonic, strength, contraction. It refers to the type of contraction or usage of a muscle where the strength doesn't change. That means you're lifting something off the ground, and once you're holding it, then the amount of motor units that you need, it doesn't change anymore because the weight doesn't change. You've lifted it off the ground, and now you're holding it, and you need a certain amount of force for that, or a certain amount of strength for that, but the strength doesn't change anymore once you've lifted it. Now, when you're in the process of lifting off the ground, let's say you want to lift a heavy desk or a bookcase, and before you have it off the ground, you will have an isometric contraction. That means the length of your arm, or the muscles that you're using, the length of those muscles does not change, because you won't be moving your arm, you won't be bending it, for example, until you have this thing lifted off the ground. So isometric refers to same length of your muscle, that is, and that's pretty much all that you need for this. Your book goes into a lot of detail on isotonic versus isometric contractions. I don't find that terribly interesting, so I'm just gonna scroll through this here. So we have here the example for isotonic, so same strength. So that means you're lifting these 20 kilograms, and of course that weight isn't going to change anymore. As soon as you have it off the ground, it doesn't change. Now, isometric contraction, that means that the load hasn't moved yet, but you're trying to sort of develop more and more strength until you're lifting it off. But before you're lifting it off the ground, the load doesn't move yet, and so that means you're in isometric contraction. Once you're lifting it off the ground, then you're in isotonic contraction. And of course you have levers, basically, and fulcrums, which means that you're depending on your overall anatomy, the length of your bones, that's sort of how much strength you can develop, and you can take a look at that. Of course, again, that means your anatomy there kind of plays a role. Take a look at this guy that's pulling a fish out. So of course you have a pretty big lever right here. So anyway, I don't find this awfully interesting, so you can scroll through that. And of course, so here's your fulcrum, and then the length of the arm, and whatever you put here at the very end, of course, and it's going to take you more, you need more leverage to pull that off the ground, for example, a load that you put all the way back here. But anyway, so your anatomy kind of plays a role in your overall performance and ability to move something or develop a certain strength for something. Load velocity relationship is also not a super important topic for us. I'm just kind of scrolling through this, and here it's getting more interesting. We have muscle disorders. Well, I wouldn't really call it a cramped muscle disorder, but it's definitely painful, and you might perceive it as some sort of a disease, but it's not. It's basically just that you have stimulated a muscle too much. There's too much calcium around, and your muscle starts locking up. And so that would be a cramp, and it can be quite painful. So you need to try to relax the muscle and give it a little rest. Disuse that leads to atrophy. What that means is, let's say you're going into outer space. Let's say you're traveling to the International Space Station. You have zero gravity. That means you don't need your muscles to lift your weight as you are moving somewhere, or you just don't have any resistance in form of gravity pull. So if you don't use your muscle, well, then it will go away. Muscle operates in the principle of use it or lose it. And if you don't use it, well, then if you don't use it, you're gonna lose it. So atrophy means loss of muscle mass. Then there are some acquired disorders and injuries, of course, that can happen. And also here a word about inherited disorders. You may have heard about Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. That is an inherited disorder that afflicts mostly boys because it is carried on the X chromosome. And if you're female, you have 2 X chromosomes, so most likely the other one's fine, and you can compensate. But if you're a guy and you only have 1 X chromosome and that one happens to be affected and you are afflicted by this disease, it's very debilitating. It involves the dystrophin protein that sort of holds the sarcomeres in place. We didn't talk much about this protein, but anyway, so if somebody has a faulty dystrophin protein, that leads to a progressive muscular dystrophy or disorder of the muscle to the point where you have less and less movement and ability to move. Kids typically end up in a wheelchair by their teenage years, and they don't have a long life expectancy either. And there's really not much, or if anything, you can do. McArdle's disease. In this case, there's a deficiency of the enzyme myophosphorylase, and that means the glycogen is not converted to glucose 6-phosphate, and that has implications for your ability to generate ATP. Now let's move on to smooth muscle next. And you might remember from the lecture on the autonomic nervous system that smooth muscle is one of the effectors of the autonomic nervous system. Remember, it was smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. Now we just finished our discussion on skeletal muscle, and so that's of course the somatic part of the peripheral nervous system that's under your control. Now we're moving into smooth muscle and then also a little bit on cardiac muscle. And that's under the control of your autonomic nervous system. And so here are a few things here about classifying different types of smooth muscle. You can take a look by location where you'd find that particular smooth muscle. It's a very common tissue in the human body. It basically lines all your hollow organs, whether that's your intestine, your esophagus, the uterus, the bladder, even blood vessels, so all the hollow organs or structures in your body. You can also take a look at the contraction pattern. There are some phasic smooth muscle and some tonic smooth muscles, and then how they communicate with the neighboring cells, like a single unit or multi-unit smooth muscle. So here, different types of smooth muscle contractions. One thing that you need to keep in mind for smooth muscle is that smooth muscle cells are small, and if they want to produce a significant kind of force, they need to team up and contract as a sort of, at least as an area that can produce some force together. And so we have what's called these peristaltic type of movements, these wave-like contractions that move through the tissue, the muscle tissue, and have whole groups and whole areas sort of simultaneously contract. And so here's different types of these peristaltic wave-like contractions that you would see. Now let's see how that is achieved. How do we get a whole area to simultaneously contract since these cells are so small? Well, the trick here is when we're looking here at our blood vessel. So it's lined with, the blood vessel here is lined with some smooth muscle right here. And now we need to see that we can get a whole area to contract simultaneously. So basically what we're doing here is we're running these axons of these autonomic neurons that carry the neurotransmitter. We're running it through the tissue, this whole axon, and it has these bulges. And we had this before. I don't know if you remember, but these are called varicosities. These little bulges right there, they contain neurotransmitter, and that neurotransmitter can be released when an action potential comes along. So then basically all of these bulges open up simultaneously, and they drop neurotransmitter onto the tissue, and then we'll take a look at how it goes from there, how we translate that into a contraction of these smooth muscle cells. Here's another example shown where we're running these axons of the autonomic neurons. We're running them full length here through the tissue, and then you have the varicosities with the neurotransmitter, and you can tell that we can open this. The action potential comes ultra fast along here, and then pretty much the neurotransmitter is dumped simultaneously on a number of these smooth muscle cells. Okay, so smooth muscle must operate over a range of length. Layers may even run in several directions. You may have longitudinal and then circular smooth muscle layers. Smooth muscle contracts and relaxes a lot slower as compared to skeletal muscle, so you have more these wave-like peristaltic contractions. It does use less energy compared to skeletal muscle. You a lot of times have sustained contraction for extended periods of time. A good example for illustrating that would be these very strong uterine contractions during childbirth. They can last on the order of a couple minutes and very strong. And it just shows again that in smooth muscle, it's important that you are communicating between the cells, that they all contract simultaneously to produce these larger, rather large movements and contractions. Since you have only small spindle-shaped cells with one nucleus, that means individually they wouldn't be able to do much, but as a whole, as an organ as a whole, they can do a lot.